Can Europe save the Iran nuclear deal? The EU says it's committed to the 2015 agreement with world powers, but Iran says the Europeans are submitting to pressure from the United States. Can a way forward be found? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Hala Mahideen. European leaders are scrambling to save the Iran nuclear deal from collapse. After years of on-off diplomacy, the agreement, known as the JCPOA, was finally signed with world powers 4 years ago. But the United States withdrew last year. 1 year on, and Iranian leaders are threatening to produce more enriched uranium, which could be used to make nuclear weapons, unless other parties to the deal protect its economy from US sanctions. Now, Iran has given the European Union, China and Russia 60 days to comply. An ultimatum already rejected by EU leaders. But they say they remain committed to keeping the nuclear deal alive. And they're urging Iran not to abandon it.
France has stayed in it and will stay in it, and I deeply wish that Iran will too. It is up to us to work to convince everyone and Iran to stay in it.
We remain fully committed to the full implementation of the JCPOA, of the nuclear deal. It's a matter of security for us and for the entire world. The European Union investment in non-proliferation continues to be a top priority for us.
Iran's foreign minister says Europe's response is not strong enough. Mohammad Javad Zarif tweeted, "The EU statement today is why the JCPOA is where it is. The US has bullied Europe and the rest of the world for a year, and EU can only express regret." Instead of demanding that Iran unilaterally abides by a multilateral accord, the EU should uphold obligations, including the normalisation of economic ties. Well, Europe has been working on a system called INSTEX to allow trade with Iran and avoid US sanctions. So how does it work? Well, it's an alternative payment channel being set up by France, Germany and the UK. INSTEX allows Iranian companies to sell to European customers without having to rely on international banks, which face penalties under US sanctions. INSTEX will then process the payments due to Iran and vice versa. The system is due to initially cover non-sanctioned items such as food and medical supplies. But leaders hope to eventually expand it to include Iran's most important export, oil. Well, let's bring in today's guest. Joining us from Rome by Skype is Nathalie Tocci, Director of the Italian Institute of International Affairs and a Special Advisor to EU Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini. From Austria is Madi Hotzi, an economist at the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies. And also by Skype from Senary-sur-Mer in France is François Nicolot, a former French ambassador to Iran. Thank you all for joining us. If I could start with Nathalie Tocci. We're hearing over the past couple of days about the difficulty the JCPOA is in. Do you think this agreement can be saved?
Yes, I absolutely do think it still can be saved. I think it's important to highlight what the difficulties are. And the difficulties are due to the fact that one of the key parties to the JCPOA, the United States, decided to withdraw unilaterally from this agreement exactly 1 year ago. Now, obviously, the JCPOA rests on a, let's call it, social contract, which on the one hand saw the revocation of all nuclear-related sanctions on the one hand, in return for the containment of Iran's nuclear program. Now, obviously, where one side of the bargain goes missing, clearly the entire architecture of the deal starts trembling. Now, Europeans have been trying over the course of the last year essentially to do what it takes to try and compensate for this fundamental flaw in the implementation of the JCPOA. Now, I think, before one even goes into sort of criticizing or not criticizing what the Europeans have done so far, I think it's important to highlight the fact that there has been a genuine commitment of Europeans to try and do what it takes to save the JCPOA, and that the inherent difficulty in doing so is that clearly we are faced with a situation in which the application of US extraterritorial sanctions makes it extremely difficult, not only, by the way, for Europeans, but also for the Russians and the Chinese that are also signatories to the JCPOA, to actually live up to the effective revocation and implementation, therefore, of sanctions vis-à-vis Iran. Now, as to the question, is this going to be, is it still possible to save the deal? I personally think that it is. I think that although it is technically extremely complicated to actually get the INSTEX mechanism to actually operate, not only to be fully operational in its current form that essentially concerns humanitarian goods, but most significantly to actually be expanded to the use of other countries, such as, for example, Russia and China, and eventually to be expanded or to be complemented by another financial mechanism to allow for trade in what is the most significant good in question, which is clearly oil. So there are clear technical difficulties involved. There are clear political difficulties involved, because this is inevitably going to cause friction between Europe and the United States. But I actually do think, and I'm fully persuaded about this, notwithstanding Iranian declarations as to their eventual sort of suspension of their side of the bargain, that actually Iran still does have a lot to gain from remaining within the JCPOA. And what the United States wants Iran to do is precisely to violate the JCPOA itself.
OK, I'll pick you up on some of these points in just a second. Let's turn now to François Nicolaud. Do you believe that this deal can be saved? And your reaction to what we've been hearing from Nathalie Tocci in Rome?
No, I believe there is a chance. I mean, the JCPOA could be saved, but personally, I don't rely so much on the capacity of the European Union to find a solution, to find a way out in the present crisis. But I hope that the Iranians will consider that it is whatever all the problems which have been created, it is the basic interest to remain in the JCPOA. In fact, they have no interest in leaving the JCPOA. What for? What for? I mean, to produce a little more uranium, enriched uranium. The Iranians are not going to produce a bomb. I mean, they won't take the risk to produce a bomb. They don't need enriched uranium for the only nuclear reactor functioning at the present moment, which is the Bushehr reactor, because the Russians are providing for the fuel, for the enriched uranium. So they have, in fact, no immediate interest in leaving the JCPOA, because leaving the JCPOA, they will lose this kind of high moral ground on which they are, and it will they will antagonize the Europeans, the Russians, the Chinese. So we'll see. Of course, it's a really difficult moment, especially for Rouhani, who's caught between the United States, of course, and its own opposition, the radical conservatives, who have always been against the JCPOA. And it has to find a middle line, a middle ground, and it has given, I wouldn't call it an ultimatum, because frankly, it was a very gentle, a very soft ultimatum. And but we have 2 months, and then after that 2 months, and then two months for Rouhani. Rouhani is trying to save time, at the moment.
But would you say
2
perhaps
months
that
is a very long time for him? Yes, tell me.
I'm sorry to interrupt, François Nicolaud, but would you say perhaps that this declaration from Iran was perhaps born out of frustration because they would argue they're not seeing the benefits of being in this deal. They aren't seeing these benefits. The economic benefits have not started to flow. So if they have nothing to lose, why not develop a bomb and get invited to a summit by President Donald Trump?
No, it's true. It's true that they're gaining no benefits from and of course it's very disappointing. And this creates a very difficult situation for Rouhani, not speaking of the Iranian population, of course, which is suffering under the difficulties created by the economic recession. But as I said, it's not only a question of economics, it's a question of moral ground, it's a question of general politics or general strategy. And I hope that Iran, considering all the pros and cons, will make the effort to remain in the GCPOA. Of course, I hope that the Europeans, of course, will make some effort, but they won't be at the level that is expected by the Iranians at the present moment. That's for sure.
Let's see if we can break down some of these solutions. Mehdi Khodsi, if I could turn to you now. This Instex vehicle, this mechanism that the Europeans have been trying to develop as a way to circumvent these sanctions from the US. Do you think this is a possible solution to the situation we're in?
Sure. Well, actually, I believe and I share similar opinion as other honorable guests. And I believe that also that the measures that Iran implemented 2 days ago and the 60 days is also very cautious. And I believe that Instex could be very good for Iran because there's several other things that Instex could do because it's a barter trading system. So it can not only help European firms to do business with Iran, but it could also help third countries to do business with Iran. And it can fill in the gap and it can act as an accounting mechanism. So it's like Iran can import some products from European countries or from other countries, and then it can re-export as a central hub to other Central Asian countries, to Afghanistan, to many other countries. So this could produce some revenue for Iran if Instex becomes operational. In fact, Iran has been placed on the ancient Silk Road, so it can benefit much from it. And if investment comes into the Iran, and if Europeans are willing to give some loans to the Iranian government, then it can also boost some revenues to the government. It can boost the budget in the government. So it can certainly help Iran in economic terms. And let me give you some also personal view on this, because I've been residing in the EU for about a decade, 1/3 of my life. And I believe that European values at these difficult times could come to the help of Iranian nation. And I'm sure that under the leadership of Ms. Mogherini, Europe can somehow facilitate some more economic activities. So it needs some incentivization for European firms to do business with Iran. Actually, I'm an economist, and I know for sure that how to enable firms, how to incentivize firms, one needs to give them some subsidies. And Europe has its own mechanism to fund SMEs, for instance, small and medium enterprises, so that they can be, they would be able to do business with Iran. And that could be also achieved in within 60 days, because Europe has the political will, as far as I see.
But is this not, Mehdi Khodsi, is this not nibbling round the edges? We're talking about trade in foods, in medicines, in developing small and medium-sized enterprises. But the Iranian economy needs funds now. It needs to be able to shift this oil, and it needs to be able to get big companies like Renault, like Airbus back into the country, and it needs to be able to shift this oil. Why is it not able to do this under this proposed Instex system?
Well, because these are mostly offered by the very large technologically advanced frontiers in the fields, and those are mostly multinational enterprises. And according to the statistics that I'm sure that the European Commission is also sharing this statistics, majority of multinational companies in Europe are owned ultimately or controlled by American companies. So it is indeed very difficult for those companies to do business with Iran. But still, SMEs, there are lots of SMEs, for instance, in Austria that are very technologically advanced in certain different fields. So they could also transfer technology into Iran so that it gives a boost to the long-run development in Iran.
Okay. Nathalie Tocci, this Instex solution sounds like a piecemeal approach. It sounds like we're papering over something until a bigger change can be made. Would you agree with that?
No, I wouldn't. I mean, I think it's worth highlighting simply how complicated this mechanism is. And just to sort of simply sum it up, I mean, basically what we're talking about are two parallel mechanisms, one in Europe and actually one in Iran itself, which essentially function as parallel barter systems. Now, the point is that in order to make this significant, meaning that in order to actually create sufficient quote-unquote credit, if you like, for the Iranians, which they could actually use within this barter mechanism to then import European goods, and a significant number of European goods, the only thing that can really make the difference is indeed oil. Now, I think what is really worth highlighting is the fact that alone Europe and Iran can actually not sort of square the circle. One really does need to imagine a situation in which you have another third party, and this is why other third party participation is so important, to chip into this mechanism. So, for example, if one were to imagine a situation in which Iran actually exports its oil or part of its oil to Russia, that therefore does not use its own domestically produced energy, and rather uses that to chip in to Instex, that creates a credit within Instex, which then Iran could use in turn to import European products. So it's a sort of triangulation, which, as you can imagine, is quite complicated to get up and running. Now, if such a mechanism were to be set up, it is being set up, but if it were to be fully implemented, actually it would be very significant for Iran, because there is no way that the United States could actually attribute a direct role of European companies in direct trade with Iran. So I think it is absolutely worth pursuing this route. Now, of course, one thing that we cannot do is point the guns at the heads of European and other companies, basically saying you have to invest in Iran. Now, that we cannot do. But what we can do is actually signal and act upon our signaling that we are serious about this. And I think that we do have, and the Iranians, if you like, 60, ultimately plus 60 days, actually do suggest that there is still a window of opportunity to actually get this up and running.
Do you think the Europeans, Nathalie Tocci, are being robust enough in tackling this? Because they have been accused by the Iranians of a timid response to the US's decision to withdraw from the JCPOA?
I think, let's be very clear about it. I think, yes, indeed, so far, rather than timid, I do think this is a gradual approach. And I think it's a gradual approach because it's really something that goes well beyond Iran and the JCPOA. I mean, this is really part of a much larger story about a very slow and gradual affirmation of European autonomy vis-a-vis the United States, both economic autonomy and eventually also autonomy in security and defense. Now, we have been in a situation of asymmetry with the United States for the last 70 years. This is not going to be reversed over the course of the next weeks or months. It's a very slow process, but I think there is this gradual coming, basically this gradual realization that this is something that we have to do, not only for the JCPOA, not only for Iran, but above all for our own interests and values. Because today it is about Iran. What if tomorrow the United States decides to impose extraterritorial sanctions on the European Union for its trade with China? Then what would we do? So I think this is something that we have to do. But as I said, reversing a situation of asymmetry that has consolidated over the course of decades is not something that can be done over the course of weeks.
François Nicolo, would you support this continued push to a separate system rather than operating in parallel with the United States? And do you think the United States would just sit back and let the Europeans get on with it?
Well, I mean, there are solutions, and of course, Instex is a solution. The whole problem is how long it will take take shape, you know, and now Instex is a very small thing, you know. It is not yet operational because we're still waiting for the Iranians to adopt the anti-terrorism rules that would allow Europe to trade and to exchange with Iran within the Instex system. So it's not yet operational. One day it will work. This is a solution, but we were thinking in another span of time, you know. It will work probably in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, perhaps even more. And now the difficulty is that we have to find a solution in 2, 4, 6 months. And this is the dilemma we're facing at the present moment.
Do you think a solution can be found in this time frame, François Nicoloux?
I believe that, yes. I mean, I want to be optimistic. When you're a diplomat, you have to be optimistic. Otherwise, you have to choose another trade, you know. But it's true that everybody will have to make concessions. The Iranians will have to make concessions. The Europeans will have to be less timid. Perhaps the Americans could push a little less. I mean, to bully the different parties a little less. Other events can happen from outside which can modify the general landscape, you know. As long as we have time in front of us, there is hope.
Okay, Mehdi Hotzi, do you think that Iran they're obviously focusing on Europe, the European parties to this JCPOA, certainly urging them to help them with this. But should Iran just be focusing on Europe? Why has there not been more of a push towards China and Russia to help deal with this?
Well, one of the reasons is because mainly before 2010, I think, European Union, the 28 members of the European Union was the largest trading partner of Iran. And exactly after the sanctions, the recent sanctions took place, then the trade relations and economic relations of Iran shifted somehow to China. And China is now the largest buyer of oil from Iran, and it is the largest trading partner with Iran. So that's why the Iranian authorities do not put any blame on China. But still, China could do much more than this, because China is enjoying large state-owned enterprises that could benefit more from Iranian oil or from Iranian economy. And the reason is that because if there is a political will by the Chinese government, then there is also a possibility that those state-owned companies could trade more with Iran. But because now they're having at least some trade with Iran, and they're exporting many products to Iran, but European Union does not have that. So that's why the blame is somehow pointed to the European Union. And I think, as also other speakers said, I think two other countries, Russia and China, should join the EU in somehow implementing the effective Instex that is more global, that other countries could also benefit from this. And this should be somehow an autonomy so that the United States government could not reach out for it. And as far as I see in the trade data and trade statistics, within the global value chains, European Union is too intertwined, is too involved with the US economy. So I cannot see such an autonomy, I mean, in economic terms in the near future. But there could be at least some other parts of the economy that could be somehow disconnected from the US market. And this is possible, and that could be achieved through some mechanism like Instex, and those could be supported by blocking statute, and many other economic measures could be implemented in order to achieve this.
Okay. Unfortunately, I think we have run out of time, but thank you so much to all three of my guests for your thoughts on how to deal with this predicament. I'd like to say thank you to Nathalie Tocci, Mehdi Hotzi and François Nicoloux. And thank you too for watching. You can catch up on the show anytime by visiting the website aljazeera.com. And remember that the discussion will continue online. You can have your say by heading to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Or join the conversation on Twitter using the handle @AJ Inside Story, or tweet me directly @Hala Mahieddine. Until next time from me and the whole team, bye for now.